Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And as always, I have a fantastic and fascinating guest with me today. Her name is Andrea Johnson. She is a transformational leadership coach who empowers executives and founders to lead with authenticity, conviction, and confidence so they can make a positive impact on their lives, organizations, and communities. She is also the host of the Stand Tall and Own It podcast, which empowers purpose driven women to lead with authenticity and impact. Andrea has her own remarkable story of resilience and overcoming adversity, leading her on a journey of deconstructing her own beliefs and conditioning, which led her to produce her signature tool called intentional optimism. Andrea, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl. This is a privilege, and I am excited to have this conversation.
I am so excited to talk to you. First of all, I absolutely love the name of your podcast, that Stand Tall and Own It. Ooh,
Thank you.
I mean, it's
Thank
pretty
you.
impactful.
Well, I hope so. I actually was just on another podcast, a guy named Adam Adams, who does the podcast on podcasting, and he suggested that I put the subtitle in there. So that's new, making it
Oh,
very clear who that is for to stand tall and own it. And this podcast started out as intentional optimists, unconventional leaders for 2 years, and I interviewed about 80 women looking for unusual leadership
hmm
stories so that women that or everyday women could hear other everyday women having the conversation about what leadership actually looks like
hmm
and kind of stripping down this idea that leadership has to present itself in one way.
hmm
And usually that meant a blonde haired, blue eyed, 6 foot tall MBA guy, right?
hmm
I mean, it's like, no, that is one vision of leadership, but women lead in so many unique ways, and the
hmm
qualities that we bring to the table make all the difference in the world. And as I've grown and as my podcast has grown, we're on episode 204. Um,
Congrats.
yeah, as we grow and the more I work with clients, the more I realized my audience was much more narrow than I thought, but that's
hmm
normal for people.
hmm hmm
And so using the term purpose-driven women, it's really a lot of executives who are female millennials who are at the spot where they're like, I'm old enough to do this and I don't have to listen to y'all anymore and I'm going to move on. Let's do something.
hmm Okay, so since you've been talking about this, I'm sure there are ears perking up all over, the internet going, oh, this sounds very interesting. So just, I know I've got all of your links in the show notes, but tell the listeners where they can find your podcast if they want to just get on it right away and start listening to it.
Sure. It's on all the regular platforms and it publishes out to Apple and Spotify. I'm also on YouTube as well.
hmm
But if you just go to my website, The Intentional Optimist, which is it's my LLC, at the
hmm
very top of the page, there's a button that says podcast and that'll take you to like the 12 most recent. And then there's a link for all of them and that'll take you out to like the website landing page.
hmm
Super
Okay, so
easy.
that really resonates with me, the intentional optimist or optimism, because I think being intentional in everything we do is very important, but sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle. How did you come up with this intentional optimism? What was the journey that took you to this place?
Sure, Cheryl. My mother was an amazing woman, um, but kind of lived a life of the Southern evangelical spouse and took her 14 years or 20 years and 14 schools to finally graduate because she was the supporting role of everything. She finally graduated cum
Oh,
laude. My parents were missionaries overseas in Seoul, Korea, and she ended up doing a lot of things for free that she didn't have the credentials to do, like
mm,
being project manager on 16 townhomes, which that's not something you just do. That's something you have to have the skill set to do. And she did
hmm
a darn good job in another language in another country.
wow.
And right. And this was for our mission, right? And then being, she was she was a Red Cross volunteer and they wanted to hire her. But as one of our rules is that we couldn't like earn extra money outside of what we were being paid. And so she did it volunteer and she was a GS 13 and she was over all of for no pay, which is like a colonel, for all of Asia and the Pacific, for all the volunteers. She won the Clara Barton Award, went to Switzerland to receive that from the International Red Cross. So my mother did all of these things, but then when she came back from when they decided to leave the field and came back to the States, my dad came back to the home office. She took a job as a secretary. And, women born in 1944, this was normal. And she was fine in another culture, even though they're more patriarchal than our culture. But it just worked well for her, but she couldn't do that here. And so she was never really fulfilled in her work. And I am almost an opposite. I'm a little bit more of my dad's personality. And I was always the kid that was told, nobody wants to hear your opinions. That's too much. This is too loud. This is, Andrea, you're calm down, do that, And so I consistently put myself in a box, lived through all kinds of things like bulimia and depression because we just can't do that to ourselves. And then when she finally started kind of really enjoying her life, my sister, who's a little bit younger than me, had kids before me, that kind of thing, becoming Nana and all that, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And first it was lupus and then it was breast cancer. And by the time my son came along, I was 42 and we adopted him because one of my things was I went through early menopause. She was not the same Nana as she was. And yet she showed the amount of resiliency and love that I just, I don't even have the personality to do some of the things she did. But she really worked hard towards the end of her life to make sure that everybody knew how much they were loved. She mended all the fences, she did all the things, and she fought hard against it. And when we lost her in 2017, I had just turned 50. And I had an 8-year-old adopted son who she called her sugar cookie. And I had spent 23 years in higher education, in administration, operations. By most accounts, I was pretty successful. And I just was like, if I'm going to live another 50 years, let's just be optimistic, right? If I'm going to live another 50 years, they are not going to be like these. And it put me in a little bit of a crucible moment to say, what do I believe? Why do I believe this? What do I want to stand for? My mother was a lot more sanguine, right? She was the bubbly person. She was like Norm, walk into Cheers, Norm. And I'm much more the person that walks in and says, okay, y'all stand in line. We're going to get moving here, right? It's just, so it's a little different in our personalities, but there are things that I think that when we see in other people, we can emulate. And I sat down with literally, I have a spreadsheet that I handed to a friend and they're like, whoa, this is a lot of stuff. But I brain dumped it all because I was like, what do I want to stand for? Why am I doing this? I had done some personal growth. I had done some cubby stuff. And I'd taken I was at Johns Hopkins for years and University of Virginia, and I took a lot of personal growth stuff. But I said, none of that is me. Right? There's an expression of me that needs to come out. I see your books behind you. You understand what that's like. But I was like, what is that? What am I trying to say? What is my message? And by the time I brain dumped it and pared it all down, I realized I had six major categories. And under those, I had some principles. And all of them came out to be this aspirational life principle set that's how I want to show up. Some of them are very natural for me. Some of them are not. Some of them I have to work hard at. And believe it or not, one of them is being optimistic. And so it's just, for me, it was an expression of this is how I want to honor my mom. This is how I want to honor my family. This is how I want to show who I was created to be. And so in putting them all together, I came up with the tenets because I'm from a religious background, but even the tenets are not really, they're a little bit, having something that's a tenet is really like a principle. And so they're the 6 tenets of intentional optimism, and they're how I do what I do. And I don't know that I'm to a place in my walk or my business where I'm ready to tell people you need to do this. But what I do say is, here's some things you need to do, and intentional optimism is a way you can do them. And so I offer them as an option for people because I think everybody kind of needs to go through that and decide what their own principles are. But in the meantime, these are some really darn good ones. And so that's what intentional optimism is. It is something that reminds me on a daily basis of who I want to be and the direction I want to head.
I can't believe it all started with a spreadsheet.
Oh, of course. Well, it actually started with just dumping it out. And then I
Mm-hmm.
needed to categorize it. And then
Mm-hmm.
I needed to see, well, where do these things overlap? And, it's funny. In the Enneagram, I'm a 6. And so I sometimes wing to the 5. That's the spreadsheet person. And that really helps me. And then I can map it out. And so that's where it started.
I have a friend who absolutely loves spreadsheets. I mean, she just gets so excited over spreadsheets, and I'm allergic to them. So I just
Oh,
never really, I never learned how to use them. I tried using them. They just don't resonate with me. But I think
sure.
that's just such a great way of doing it because it certainly does outline and put everything on the board, so to speak. So how many did you come up with? You narrowed it down to these 6 tenants. How
Sure.
many had you just poured out on that spreadsheet?
It's 6 main tenants with 3 principles underneath
Okay.
each one. So the
Hmm.
reality is it's because it's the 6 tenants and then there's 3 under each. So I don't do math. I can do
18-ish.
spreadsheets, but I don't do math. So it's like 6 times 4, 24. So
Uh-huh.
but within each of those is like a stated principle and a stated
Mhm.
how I'm going to live it out. And so those 6 tenets came down to be optimistic, present, energetic, courageous,
Mm.
wise, and intentional. And
Mhm.
I tell people those intentional and that optimistic are bookended because
Mhm.
without either one of those, nothing else is possible. And so, each one holds a different kind of attitude and a different piece of, and it all goes into leadership. And some of it speaks to how I want to live, and some of it
Mhm.
speaks to how I want to treat others. So I don't really know. I could probably pull it. I know I kept all the handwritten notes,
Oh,
and
I'm
that was
sure
just
you did.
pages. That was just pages because I
Yeah.
because I was like, I'm just going to write down words. And what's funny is that this is now when I do core values work, that kind of helped me understand how to do that and how to teach other
Mhm.
people how to do that brain dump and how
Mhm.
to narrow things down and how to pull them all together. And these days, Cheryl, I use Chat GPT to help me pull stuff together. What do all these
Mhm.
things have in common? Or how can I put these all together? And so now um, I've tried putting intentional optimism together in a Venn diagram, but it's hard
Mhm.
to do with 6. But I'm working on it. We'll get there.
Mhm. Okay, so you started this intentional optimism for yourself and to help
Yes.
yourself, personal growth. When did you decide it was time to share it with the public and to help other
Yeah.
people through these tenets?
a- as soon as it probably took 6 or 8 months of me working on it,
Mhm.
but then as soon as I realized that I actually was okay sharing my opinions, there were some
Mm.
revelations that came along the way.
Mhm.
And as soon as I would share it with my friends, or actually, she's a business mentor who her mom and my mom were best friends.
Oh.
And I've known her since I was 16. But she's more of a business mentor for me. And she said, the world needs this, Andrea. So
Mhm.
I had people that were encouraging me to share, which was
Mhm.
overriding some of the messages I had received when I was younger, that not everybody
Mhm.
wants to hear your opinions. Because
Mhm.
here I am, on podcasts sharing my opinion.
Mhm.
And people listen to my podcast, which is 99% opinion.
Mhm.
Well, maybe not. Maybe it's 80% because I love to pull in definitions and facts and stuff because
Mhm.
I want to have a foundation for things. And so during the pandemic, so it's all happened as well. I kind of developed it, and then I started thinking about it. And then in 2019, I um, I started thinking about my business, and I decided I was going to make a business with that name. That's when I got my LLC. And then the pandemic hit, and I had to take my entire team off grounds in Virginia. At the UVA, we call it grounds; it's not the campus. But pulled them off grounds, and so I was able to work from home, and I was doing some weeding out in my back garden around my pool, and I was listening to a podcast, and it's a speaker that I had met at a conference, and she is speaking coach. She's her podcast. Basically, the question was, "Is podcasting your next stage?" And I was like, I stood up, like talking in my earbuds, talking to the world. Yes, yes, podcasting is my next stage. That's when I started thinking, this is how I could share it. And
Mhm.
that's when I really started sharing my message truly with the world. So from my mom dying in February of 2017 to putting my podcast out in August of 2020, that's actually quite a few years, but I had been sharing it, and I'd been talking
Mhm.
about it, and I had been doing things with it. But the reality of how long it took to actually put it out in public. And then I started blogging on it. And so some of
Mhm.
those earliest episodes are the basics. And they're the kind of young, naive interpretations of what I would say
Mhm.
are, and you know what that's like having a podcast for a while,
Mhm.
of my theories and my aspirations. And I've gone back now, this many episodes in, and this year is kind of dedicated to pulling my core values work, my intentional optimism, my leadership work, all of that
Mhm.
together. And so I've already got a plan for all of the episodes, being able to say, all right, this is what I said, and you can go back here and listen to this, but here's how it's panning out. Here's how it's
Mhm.
a better, here's a more mature expression of it. But it took, I guess that was what, almost 4 years, 3.5 years.
Mhm. Oh, well, it does take a while to fine tune a
Hmm.
podcast and yeah, find your direction. But it's a really
But even from getting those tenets done to sharing,
yep.
it took about 3.5 to 4 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and along the way, though, you were probably fine tuning those tenets because you
Oh,
were using them for
absolutely.
yourself and you were, practicing them.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I started working with clients and handing them, because I had um, a veterinary hospital that I worked with almost all of the frontline managers. And
Hmm.
because my background is all in schools of medicine and that kind of thing, it was very translatable.
Hmm.
And I would hand them like, this is, you can have this free content. And you're paying me for executive coaching. Here's all my core value stuff. Here's my intentional optimism stuff. And it wasn't until they started coming back from a meeting that had upset them or that they had decided this is not how I want to show up. And I she said, I flipped open this notebook and there was the intentional optimism tenets. And I thought, oh, that's the problem. I need to do this better. I want to be
Mm.
more X. And I'm like, that's how you're using them? I mean, so that's how it just keeps morphing and becomes more and more clear that this is something that I can easily make it so that other people can take in and then adapt for themselves and figure out how they can use them.
Hmm. So that was with a veterinary clinic?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, it's veterinary medicine is very similar to human medicine, and I'm very familiar. All of my work, I think out of 30 years of being employed by someone else, 28 of them have been in institutes of higher learning at the graduate level.
Hmm.
And two of that was at seminary. That's where I met my husband. But the rest of them were in the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Oncology, and in the University of Virginia Research and Administration, but then the School of Medicine. So I'm very familiar with the way people who go into sciences think. So that won't surprise you that I can handle a spreadsheet and that kind of
Hmm.
thing. But I understand too the dedication
Hmm.
that they bring to a work like that. And in veterinary sciences, they're dedicated to the patient and the human. So
Hmm.
they're dedicated to these patients who can't advocate for themselves.
Hmm.
And so they have really intense drive for compassion. And so then a lot of times they have problems communicating with each other. So this actually was a very eye-opening experience coaching with that
Hmm.
group.
Hmm. Sure. So let's go back a little bit and we'll talk about the deconstructing your own personal belief system.
Sure.
What was that like and what precipitated that decision?
I don't know that it was a conscious decision, but I will say, what was it like? It was the hardest thing I have ever done
Hmm.
and will probably ever do. And
Hmm.
yet it's not finished. Because as
Hmm.
soon as you start deconstructing one thing, you start recognizing, oh, I made
Hmm.
those assumptions over there too, and over there. And so you
Hmm.
start deconstructing everything, but it gets easier.
Hmm.
We learn to do hard things so we can do harder things, right?
Hmm.
Um, but 2017 was a banner year
Hmm.
in my life. We lost my mother in February, and then I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia, and August 11th and 12th in Charlottesville, Virginia of 2017 was the Unite the Right rallies here, and it was extremely moving, and it was one of those things. I mean, it was one of the first times I've ever seen anybody drive a car down an alleyway in order to mow people down. I mean, now we've seen it more likely, but this was the first time I'd seen that happen. And it was a young woman who was a paralegal this was the day after the Unite the Right stuff. And this gentleman drove his car right down and killed, she was from my town here. And
Oh.
so, and it really, it was kind of the start of a lot of, an indicator for a lot of the racial unrest that and reconciliation. And I don't know what now is happening, but it was a start. It was a canary in the coal mine, shall we say,
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of things. And it was a moment that woke us both up and I don't mean that in a wokeness sense. I mean, it helped us see where we were not paying attention and it helped us see
Mm-hmm.
what was going on in our community. And for me personally, being raised, like I'm generationally Southern Baptist. My grandfather was a deacon, and my parents were missionaries. And my husband is still a pastor. And I met him at seminary. My faith is extremely important and strong, but because of some of the things that came out of already being in a crucible with my mother's death and grieving her, and then having this happen and recognizing the environment I thought I was in was not what I was in. It's like taking a fish out of water and saying, "Here, you breathe air for a little while," and the fish is like, "No, I can't," right? And then, but for us, we can realize we can actually come out of the water and breathe air and do something different. Whether or not you want to or whether you need to is completely up to you. But for me, it was a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that a lot of the people I had idealized, I had listened to, I had trusted, that were famous. And I don't mean like celebrities. I mean famous in theological circles, famous in denominational circles, now
Mm-hmm.
famous politically. A lot of these people were espousing things that I just felt were completely contrary to the teachings that I could see in the Bible. And I experienced, I'm familiar with the term cognitive dissonance.
Oh, yes.
It was this idea that some of the things I'd grown up with on the mission field were very ecumenical because we were all there together. But
Mm-hmm.
then coming home to college, I needed to fit in, and I was in Southeast Texas. I was in Houston, and I was Southern Baptist, and so I went all in and became extremely conservative, and theologically and politically, whatever. But it was very comfortable putting on kind of blinders where I said, I have the answers. I have all the answers now, right? At
Mm-hmm.
like 23, and I held on to that and went deeper and deeper into it because of my own insecurities about and messages that I'd received growing up that nobody wants to hear my opinion and thinking for yourself is going to send you to hell. I mean, and that year of 2017 was the moment when I just was like, no mas. And so 18 and 19, by the time I hit 2020, it's like it was a 2 to 3 year process of being willing to say, for me personally, no matter who, is watching or listening, whatever your background is or whatever you believe, for me, it was so strong. I thought my family would abandon me. I thought I would never have any friends. I thought my husband would get fired. I thought all kinds of things. And I just had the conversation with God. All right, God, I am going to walk all the way out to the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not there, then I'm just going to be willing to go over the edge and just walk away because what I see right now just doesn't even remotely come close to what I thought you were. And I need to know if all these people are wrong or if you don't exist or if you're
Mm-hmm.
wrong. And that's a really hard place to be in for someone who is at, 50 years old. I mean, I've been a professed Christian since I was 8. Right. So before that, my parents tell me I had all that, and I was raised around all of this. I have nearly a master's of divinity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just I have a lot of knowledge. I'm biblically literate. And so for me, it was just so difficult, but I needed to be willing to say that. I needed to be willing to say, I'm going to learn some different things. I'm going to listen to some different people
Mm-hmm.
because underneath all of that was, why can't women be pastors?
Mm-hmm.
Why this? Why do we need to stand on this as a hill to die on? Whatever issue. And so the decision became, I would even say it was like a decision that was made over probably about a year because it was really hard. But once I did, it may take me a while. Cheryl, when I decide something, look out. I mean, it's just like, but once I got there, because I even would say to my friends as I was trying to process going through this decision-making process
Mm-hmm.
or work through it, I'm like, I don't know that I really just want to shake my fist at the patriarchy. But then it was like, I think that's actually what I want to do. And being in the position I'm in now, having come through a lot of really, really difficult stuff. I mean, spent days on the floor crying,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
having hard conversations, going for like unfollowing family members on social
Mm-hmm.
media, not unfriending because that's not me as a person. That's not who I am. That's not what I do. But even trying to have conversations, my sister called me about a year into that process. She's like, all right, are you okay? Can we have a conversation? Can you tell me what you're talking about? And I was just learning. I was,
Mm-hmm.
I had never even heard the term patriarchy. I didn't really understand what misogyny was, but I had like talked about it in my podcast. I just done it in a different way. I just didn't know. I didn't know. I was educating myself. And the more I learned, the angrier I got, the more rage that came out. And I said, well, I'm willing to talk to you, but I need you to understand that, I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't speaking to anyone, but I just hadn't
Right.
talked about this. So I'm willing to tell you where I am, but I need you to just listen. And, she said, well, okay, fine. By the end of the conversation, um, she said, well, like when we have, I don't want to have family dinners where we talk about politics or anything because I'm always be on the minority.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, I'd like you to just hear my side. And she said, well, you could listen to our side too. And I said, all due respect, I lived your side for 50 plus years. Oh, that's a good point. Like, yeah, you're talking to somebody who's been there.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were family members concerned I had lost my religion, concerned, and the, that kind of feeling of being untethered
Mm-hmm.
and that feeling, one of my core values is belonging. So feeling like you just don't belong anymore
Mm-hmm.
is so it's like disorienting and
Mm-hmm.
it's traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I wasn't going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
It was just one of those things I had gotten to the place where I just needed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming through a lot of that fire, I'm to the place where my faith, I got out to the edge and it was almost like my son is very high ADHD and we were those older parents who couldn't keep up with him. And so we had one of those little vest things on him with a like a retractable leash because in the stores he was just fast, and I
Right.
was 42 when he was born, right? So it's just like and I didn't birth him, so it was like I got tendonitis immediately, but it was like I was on one of those tethered things. I got out to the edge and it was like God said, I got you. It's okay. You're right. You actually have the ability, Andrea, to think about these things in a way that is true and valid, and you don't have to listen to all of these people, most of them men, that are telling you
Mm-hmm.
how to interpret the Bible, public event, social events, public opinion. You don't have to listen to any of those people. You can do this for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the part, and I'm still learning it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm still walking that path of deconstructing the conditioning and the assumptions that I don't get to share my
Mm-hmm.
thoughts on something. And my husband, will be married 30 years in May,
Mm-hmm.
and he has kind of walked this journey with me, not quite to the extent, but there will be times when I'll just express my opinion with him, and we'll come back a week later and he'll say, guess what I just heard so and so say on the news? And I'm like, what? And he said, this. And it's like, you said that a week ago. I'm like, oh, and so little things like that have helped me come to the place where it's like, it's okay for me to share this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me a lot more confidence. But I call myself a deconstructed, reconstructed Christian
Mm-hmm.
because I tore down all of the churchy stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
tore down what we would call ecclesiology, all of the practices, all of the traditions. It's like they don't mean anything to me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They just don't. And so that's gone. But what's now there is this resilient, vibrant faith that I can actually live out in a
Mm-hmm.
way that helps others flourish. I don't feel the need to know the answer any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives me more freedom to be who I was created to be, which is not the mold that they all wanted me to be in. So
Mm-hmm.
I know that was a very long answer, but it's a complicated topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a complicated topic, and there's a lot of vulnerability in walking that
Yeah.
path or that journey. And being perfectly honest with people who you're that close to. I think it's a lot easier to be that transparent with perfect strangers because they're probably not going to judge you quite like
Right.
family can, or
Yeah.
people you've been very, very close to for years. So yeah, congratulations on doing that. I mean, did anybody at any point, look at you and say you are absolutely wrong, and I don't like the way you're talking and or acting?
No, because I'm still pretty good at tap dancing in a lot of areas.
Hmm.
I will say, it wasn't, I was blamed for it, but it really wasn't it wasn't me that they were upset with because my husband has gone through a lot of this as well. But
Hmm.
we did have a split in our church. People
Hmm.
who literally it was, you're not conservative enough.
Hmm.
And it was literally, I don't like the way you speak about racial justice. I don't like the way you speak about acceptance of people. I don't like the way, you talk about those things. And I mean, we're hearing a lot of that right now, right out of a lot of evangelical Christians. And, um, it didn't work. My husband's still there. And, the people who tried to have him fired are gone. And it's like, it's would be easy to be vindictive but literally it's like I wish for you that you find a place where you are comfortable and where you can live out your faith in a way
Hmm.
that doesn't just put you in an echo chamber, but
Hmm.
challenges you in a way that will help you grow. Because
Hmm.
I'm not interested in anybody being miserable all the time. I'm not
Hmm.
interested in anybody fighting. I'm not, but when we can't do it, there's other places to be, and that's okay. And
Hmm.
we were prepared if it was us being in a different place, that's okay too,
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I have had a couple of those.
Hmm.
My sister and I tend to have Marco Polo conversations about this stuff. You know what I'm talking about? The app, where it's asynchronous. So
Uh-huh.
we have the ability to say what we think with the other person not looking us in the eye,
Uh-huh.
and and then have our own personal meltdowns or whatever, and then come back on and say, okay, here's my response to you,
Hmm.
and then there are times like, okay, we need to stop this for a while because
Uh-huh.
I'm just going to be angry at you for a long time. um and so there's some of that, but
Hmm.
most people, I actually had more of that when I was still in the really conservative side because I
Hmm.
worked in medical research. I literally had one PhD student look at me and say, okay, I just totally don't get, you really think this creation thing is like a literal creation, like God actually created? And I'm like, yeah. And, I had more of that on that side. And yet there was still more acceptance of me being there and moving from the conservative side to, I don't know, the not conservative side. I'm not,
Hmm.
I'm just out of that community. I've had more people being very accepting, and more people cheerleading me than anything else because I just don't. I had a coach, two things she said to me. One was in the middle of all of that deconstruction. She said, Andrea, if Jesus is who he says he is, he can hold on to you better than you can hold on to him. And I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
and I've held on to that. That has been so comforting to me.
Hmm.
But the other thing is, she just said, you don't have to be available for that conversation. I'm like, oh, what? She said, so just don't be available. And so, like, I'm just not available for those conversations. And I'm learning how to turn them around. I'm learning how to be gracious and kind. And that's just part of living out intentional optimism. None of that
Hmm.
goes away when you deconstruct, reconstruct. It's all still there. My core values are still who I am. I am still the same person. I am much more patient,
Hmm.
much more understanding, much more compassionate. And so I like myself a whole lot better.
Hmm.
Not just because I don't feel like I'm being duped and gaslighted anymore, but because I like the person that is coming out of this
Hmm.
process.
So let me ask you this: with that deconstruction and reconstruction process, is that something you work through with your clients? Is that something with the coaching that you do? Is that a process that you have them go through?
This is not a formal coaching piece for me.
Okay.
I do have a few people that I mentor that
Hmm.
it would, if it were paid, it would look like that.
Hmm.
For right now, this is really more of a mentor thing. Would I
Okay.
turn down anybody wanting to have this conversation? No. Would
Hmm.
I turn down anybody who said, Andrea, I'm going to sign up for your executive coaching program, but this is what I want to talk about?
Hmm.
Not a problem. I just haven't gone in that direction yet. One of the pieces for 2025 for me is I've come back to this. I told you a minute ago that I almost have my Master's of Divinity.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I've come back to is that I really want to finish and I really want to get my PhD.
Hmm.
And so at 58, here we go. But so that's a piece of it. And I think that as I move in that direction, this piece is probably going to become a little bit more visible in my work and a little bit more of a formal piece of it. But right now, I'm still learning.
Okay. And I just want to highlight that for the listeners because at 58, you can do anything you want to
Yes.
do at any age, and don't let anybody try and stop you or tell you that you're too old. You are never too old to do anything. So,
And
put
yes,
that in your pipe and smoke it. Okay, so
absolutely.
let's
So,
talk a little bit more then about your transformational coaching
okay.
and how you work with people. Um, yeah, just a little bit more information would be great.
Yeah, because and I've struggled with what to call myself,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not a life coach. I am John Maxwell leadership team trained and
Mm-hmm.
licensed, and I am a DISC consultant. So I have a lot of tools in my tool belt that I work with people. I'm licensed to teach and work through a lot of his books, but I also have my own IP. So there's a lot of work that goes in there together, and I use Maxwell tools to help me take people, especially female
Mm-hmm.
CEOs, founders, and in the millennial, like probably young moms, probably from a faith space, right? It's like that's a
Mm-hmm.
piece, a part of it. But the ones that keep coming back, I help them go from what I call disempowered, which is
Mm-hmm.
where we have responsibility with no authority, where we feel like we're constantly compromising something, whether it's our core values or whatever, to figure out how to make things work. Where sometimes, like I was bored, right? Where you're I could do my job with one hand tied behind my back and 20 hours a
Mm-hmm.
week and still probably have time left over.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was, and that was as high as I could get. And I
Mm-hmm.
was bored. And that's a disempowered feeling. It's
Mm-hmm.
when I would do all of the research, but my boss, would then make the decisions. It's like, well, what is the point here of me being
Mm-hmm.
the operations manager,
Mm-hmm.
And so I specifically point out those kinds of things. What it turns out to look like for a lot of my clients is disempowered may look like I'm stuck.
Mm-hmm.
It may look like I can't see around this particular obstacle, or I followed all the rules, Andrea, and I'm not fulfilled.
Mm-hmm.
What's missing? And I think that you become impactful, not because empowering someone, Cheryl, a lot of people can do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Empowering people means that they have the tools and the knowledge to do what they need to do. My special piece of that is figuring out what tools and what knowledge you need. And one of the places we start is with core values. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I started long, long ago and didn't realize I was working on when I did Franklin Covey, when I did Stephen Covey's book, and I did my governing values. But as I became a coach and I started looking at core values, this is where that spreadsheet and going down and all that stuff comes into. I realized I'm very much into root cause analysis, and I started understanding that if I didn't understand my core values well, if I didn't understand my non-negotiables, who I am at my core, then there's no way for me to even live out those tenets of intentional optimism. It's all going to be hit or miss. And so what I do is I take women who feel, or leaders who feel disempowered, and help them become impactful by helping them understand who they are, and that feeds why we do what we do, and then how we do what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And those three pieces are core values, disc communication, and or another one, I'm licensed in that one, and it's just really helpful, and then intentional optimism if they choose to use those life principles. But when I take people from disempowered to impactful, it's like all of a sudden they light up the world. They
Mm-hmm.
take a new job. I have two clients out of that veterinary hospital have gone on to completely leave and go into completely different work. And I saw one recently, and I looked at her and I said, "Are you taller?" she said, She said, no. And I said, you're standing taller. And I didn't
Mhm.
mean that to be a thing with my podcast, but I said, you're standing straighter. And she said, I'm empowered here. She said, I
Mhm.
feel fulfilled here. And I wasn't. And I'm like, I know you don't have that apologetic look to you. So
Mhm.
when I say transformational, it could be with any number of tools. It could be a John Maxwell book. It could be working through core values or something like that. But the goal for me is my big goal is in the next 5 years, I want to empower 1,000 women to do this. And so for this year, I'd like to work with 100. And that could be in a group coaching setting or an individual level or workshops. But my desire is to help all women understand that it's okay to think for themselves.
Mhm.
It's good to think for themselves. It's good to take their core values, use them as a filter, use them as a visionary tool, use them as the thing that helps explain their unique contribution, and then
Mhm.
be able to say, all right, now what am I going to do? And my dream would be to like coach the first female president or,
Mhm.
something like that to help women see that their leadership capacity is way bigger than they think.
Mhm.
And especially for women who've decided to start a company, that's a big step. And they're already going into probably, I guess, career fields that I would say probably ones that are dominated by men just because there's
Mhm.
still everything is still dominated by men.
Mhm.
And now more than ever, I think it's extremely important. I felt like coming out of COVID, we had a really unique stance where women showed that we did remote work better. We
Mhm.
showed that our natural nurturing capabilities worked better. We showed that our analytical skills were higher, all of that. And so I want to keep writing that and I want to keep helping empowering women to do that. So right now I'm calling myself a transformational leadership coach that focuses on core values. It's like values based.
Excellent. So, Andrea, where can people find you? If you can give us some links, how they can connect with you. Do you have any specific offerings or anything? Just, this is your time.
Well, okay, let me go ahead and tell you about the offering that I'm really promoting right now,
Hmm.
because it goes hand in hand with what I just finished. I have a core values downloadable, which is easy, and some people can do that, and that's on my
Hmm.
website, and I'll tell you about that in a second. I also have a digital course that's
Hmm.
just 6 modules, and it'll walk you through the process. And for some
Hmm.
people, that's also all they need, and it's extremely affordable. And then, but I had some people say, "But how do I do this?" And so I started I did like a small alpha test, and now I'm in a beta for this, what I will eventually become a signature program. It's core values coaching, and you get the digital course, and then you meet with me 6 times, and I push back, and I help you go deeper, and I help you figure out, does this need to become the mission of your business, or how is this going to affect the way you work, and help them learn to apply it and be strategic with it. So that's in beta testing right now. And so at the very top of my website, there's a button just like that podcast one, and it's theintentionaloptimist.com is a place that says core values beta.
Hmm.
And if you click on that, we can have a discovery call, or you can just go ahead and purchase it.
Hmm.
It's purchasable right there through, and we'll just get you started. That's the thing I would really like to, I would love to connect with your audience with, because I'm trying to only enroll 10. I've already got 4 in the pipeline, and I'd really love to get this information in. You're kind of in on the ground floor you're helping me figure out how I want to present this. But if you're looking for free content, my website again, if you go to, there's a free downloads button, and on the offerings page, that's all of my free downloads are right in one place, so it's easy to find them. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn. I am on Facebook, but not super engaged there. That's mostly
Hmm.
my family stuff.
Uh-huh.
But you can DM me through Instagram or LinkedIn and tell me that you heard me here on the FemiNinja Project, and I will know that you are not spam, and I will respond to you. And if you want, we can set up a call and just kind of talk about some things to see where you are and what you might need next. But of course, my podcast is available both on Apple and Spotify and all those, and on YouTube. So I would love to connect with you in any of those ways. If you're in the Central Virginia area, I do a leadership conference called Live to Lead. And I just did one in October. I'll be doing another one in October here in Charlottesville. And just this week, we're doing another one down in Lynchburg. So I'm partnering with someone down there. We'll do those as well. So if you're looking for in-person conferences, that's also a way to connect with me. And I do workshops and keynotes and all that kind of stuff. So I would just love to pour into you and your people and see how we can get a minimum of 100 more women empowered and impactful in 2025.
That sounds awesome. Do you have any? I mean, you have given us an awful lot of information, a lot to think about. Do you have any final little pearls of wisdom or one little thing that you can leave with the listeners before we sign off?
Sure, it's going to go along with that think for yourself piece
Hmm.
is that I believe that each of you was created specifically for good things, specifically for a purpose. And we all know that we have a little bit of that in us, like we all feel that a little bit.
Hmm.
And I would just encourage you to look for that, look deep for that. Imagine what it could be like if we don't all need to be famous, but what if you're somebody that needs to show up in PTA meetings? What if you're somebody that needs to show up at your church? What if you're somebody who needs to step up in your job? Please be courageous enough to think for yourself. If you need to borrow courage, there's
Hmm.
plenty of us like Cheryl and me that will help loan it to you.
Hmm.
We will offer it to you for a little while and then you can build up your own. But be courageous and think for yourself and become the woman that you were created to be because if you don't bring what you need to bring to the table, we're gonna miss out.
Hmm. Excellent. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being here today. It has been an absolute delight talking to you and hearing your story. And I love your energy. I got to tell you that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a lot.
It is a lot, and I love it. So, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing that energy with us.
My privilege. Thank you so much.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. What an incredible story, incredible episode, and fantastic information. Share this episode with everyone you know, especially women who might be struggling to find their purpose. And remember to love yourself with all your heart,
Mm,
find your purpose, and find your courage because courage is contagious. And
mm.
when one of us has it and can share it with others, we can lift up a lot of people and we can just make the world, I believe, a much better place. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.